So what was going on in the spirit realm before the fall of Lucifer? There's one passage in the Bible that speaks to this issue, and that's in Ezekiel 28. So I'd like you to turn to Ezekiel 28, starting in verse 12. This passage has two targets, if you will. One, the king of Tyre, a very arrogant and pompous man. And two, Satan himself, or at this time, Lucifer. It obviously goes beyond the king of Tyre when it says he was in Eden, the garden of God, and a cherubim, or a cherub. So we know that it's talking about Lucifer. But starting in verse 12, I'll read through the passage, and then we'll go back through it. Ezekiel 28:12, halfway through, it says, "You had the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was your covering, the ruby, the topaz, the diamond, the beryl, the onyx, the jasper, the lapis lazuli or sapphire, the turquoise, and the emerald. And the gold, the workmanship of your settings and sockets, was in you. On the day that you were created, they were prepared. You were the anointed cherub who covers, and I placed you there. You were on the holy mountain of God. You walked in the midst of the stones of fire. You were blameless in all your ways, or you were blameless in your ways, from the day you were created until unrighteousness was found in you." It says, "By the abundance of your trade, you were internally filled with violence, and you sinned. Therefore I have cast you as profane from the mountain of God, and I have destroyed you, O covering cherub, from the midst of the stones of fire. Your heart was lifted up because of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom by reason of your splendor. I cast you to the ground. I put you before kings, that they may see you. By the multitude of your iniquities, in the unrighteousness of your trade, you profaned your sanctuaries. Therefore I have brought fire from the midst of you. It has consumed you, and I have turned you to ashes on the earth in the eyes of all who see you." Now remember, God has created the earth. If you'll notice, I've got an earth here that is not divided, continents that are not divided. And we'll get to the reason why that I'm using that. I'm not being dogmatic on that, but there's a reason why I believe that the continental drift occurred at the fall of Lucifer. And between the fall of Lucifer and the restoration of the earth that we see in the 7 days in Genesis 1. But here we have a description of Lucifer in his glory. And we know that there's a physical realm that exists. We know that there's an Eden. We're not sure if this Eden is in heaven at the throne of God or on the newly created earth. But clearly, in Job 38, the angelic realm was preoccupied with the earth, because that's what's being described in the passage that we read in Job 38. When God asked Job, "Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth, when all the morning stars and the sons of God shouted for joy?" They weren't shouting for joy at the creation of the universe or the solar system or the sun or Mars, but the earth. There's an apparent preoccupation, the angelic realm, on the earth, at least in eternity past, and certainly now in time and all through eternity. But what was going on? It says in verse 12, you had the seal of perfection. As far as the angelic realm is concerned, the angels and the principalities, the rulers, the dominions, that angelic realm that is described by Paul in Colossians 1:16, Lucifer had the seal of perfection. He was the best. What you're going to see is the zenith of God's angelic creative order in this one individual called Lucifer. So he had the seal of perfection. It says he was full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. When you read the book of Proverbs, what characteristic, what virtue do you have to receive wisdom? The humility and the fear of the Lord. And we can assume from this passage that Lucifer, being full of wisdom, also was full of humility and the fear of the Lord. He occupied the perfect place of a creature in his relationship with the Creator. Remember, all things were created by Him, Jesus Christ, and for Him, and Lucifer was functioning for Him and in submission to Him. He was in no way created a sinner or arrogant, because we see in verse 15 that the unrighteousness that was found in Lucifer was found in him, in Lucifer. But he was full of wisdom, and he was perfect in beauty. For God to describe him in this way, after creating this magnificent universe and this earth and all the angelic realm, for him to say that this one individual was perfect in beauty, is for God to use almost hyperbole in His own creation. He was the zenith of God's creation. He was chosen. It says later, he was the anointed cherub, the one that was set apart. It says, you were in Eden, the garden of God. And I'm going to flip a coin and say that Eden could have been on the newly created earth, or it could have been at the throne of God. I'm going to put it on the earth, okay? And a lot of times it's hard for us to imagine, well, how could that be on the earth? Well, how could Lucifer have existed on the earth? Just stay with me for a moment, and I'll show you why. But certainly the second Eden, or the Eden that Adam and Eve were in, was on the earth. And let's just say that Lucifer's Eden was on the earth, and let's say that he occupied a position of authority over the earth. Let's keep moving on. It says, every precious stone was your covering. The ruby, the topaz, the diamond, the beryl, the onyx, the jasper, the sapphire, the turquoise, and the emerald. These are the jewels that were in the linen ephod of the high priest later on in Exodus, given to the high priest. If you were to read the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Old Testament, there are only 9 listed here in your English versions, and the Hebrew version that your versions came from. But the Septuagint lists all 12 in the exact order of the 12 stones in the linen ephod for the high priest. And most agree that these stones indicate that Lucifer occupied the position of a priest, or the high priest, among the angelic realm. What does the priest do? He represents the Jewish Israel. The priest in Israel represents the people to God and God to the people. And in this position, he would be the go-between, or the intermediary between God and the angelic realm. Lucifer had not fallen, so we know there's no creation of man. How do we know that? By the time man shows up on the scene, there's the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Evil doesn't exist at this time. Man is nowhere present. Man has not been created. We're dealing with a spirit realm, an angelic realm, and Lucifer is the high priest, and he's the zenith of this whole creation. It says, and the gold the workmanship of your settings and sockets. In the King James Version, that indicates that it's there. These terms here indicate some type of musical ability that Lucifer had. And so he was created as a musical creature. As the high priest, the one in charge of worship, he would also be, if you will, the worship leader in eternity past. It says, on the day that you were created, they were prepared. Is Lucifer an eternal being? The answer is no. He had a beginning, just like every single other creature in the angelic realm or in the human realm. Lucifer had a beginning. He's not eternal. He will live for eternity. He will suffer for eternity. But he is not eternal. He is not the I am. It says in verse 14, you are the anointed cherub who covers. The anointed means he's set apart. The cherub means that he's an angelic creature, not necessarily an angel, but an angelic creature. The cherubim, that would mean more than one. The I am on the end makes it plural. Means that there are more than one. He's the one cherub that is set apart to guard or to cover the throne of God. You could actually picture Lucifer going back and forth, having a very close relationship with God proximity-wise. And he's covering, he's going back and forth, he's protecting the throne of God. That's always kind of thrown me. I've wondered, well, what was he protecting God from? I don't know. There's no evil. But every king has those that are very close to them and that are guardian of the king. And Lucifer is the guardian cherub. And he is protecting or going... he's going to and from the angelic realm, but he is the one angel that has the closest relationship with the Father or with the Trinity. He says, they're the anointed cherub who covers or guards. And I placed you there. You were on the holy mountain of God. And this holy mountain of God is a place reserved for the Most High God. When this mountain of God is mentioned, this is a place of authority. It's a place of power. And it does indicate that Lucifer had a type of, we would say political, but he had a type of authority or power or jurisdiction over the angelic realm. If he was on the holy mountain of God, he was like an angelic prime minister or a viceroy, one that would rule the angelic realm for God. Being the anointed cherub who guards and being on the holy mountain of God, you can see that God has given Lucifer part of his sovereignty, or he has given him sovereignty over the angelic realm. Does that make sense? Do you understand what sovereignty is? Most Christians discombobulate this word. Sovereignty simply means to rule or to be king, to be ruler, to be the ruler. When somebody is given authority over any type of realm, they are given sovereignty over that realm. And Lucifer, being on the holy mountain of God, is given sovereignty over the angelic realm by God. And so he occupies a religious place, if you will, as the high priest, a very spiritual place, being very close to God, a political place or a ruling place, on the holy mountain of God. He's covered in these stones that are brilliant stones. What would happen if you were to stand in the very presence of God and you were to be covered with these stones? What would that make you look like? You would look brilliant. What happens to a diamond when you hold it under a light? It's brilliant. It's measured in its brilliance. And that brilliance only comes out in the light. What do you think happened to Lucifer when he had such close proximity to God? Do you understand how bright God is? Do you understand that the Father and the Son themselves, the brightness that come from their glory, will light the entire New Jerusalem, and the New Jerusalem will light the earth in the eternal state? The very brilliance of God will actually provide the light source for a city that's 1,500 miles square. And that city itself, because of the brilliance of God, will provide light for the entire earth as the earth rotates on its axis in eternity. And Lucifer is in the very presence of God. Do you know why they call him Lucifer now? That's the Latin word. It means to be bright, or the bright and shining one. You remember Moses when he went up on the mountain and he had a few brief interludes with God? What happened to Moses? He glowed, and they had to put a veil over his face to cover that. So Lucifer would have been a brilliant, glorious, holy, righteous, humble high priest, worship leader, prime minister, and ruler of God. Let's read on. You walked in the midst of the stones of fire. Two important points about these stones of fire. When you read later in Ezekiel, the cherubim who are described in Ezekiel chapter 1 and chapter 10, they move and they have wheels, wheel-like structures. And they move in all four directions without moving their head, without changing directions. And these wheels just keep going very, very fast. And they move on what are coals of fire. And these in Ezekiel's vision, these coals of fire are actually sprinkled on Jerusalem to indicate judgment. But it has nothing to do with the lake of fire. That's not what it's talking about. It's talking about some type of physical manifestation of God's holiness and even God's judgment. In that sense, when they're sprinkled over Jerusalem for judgment. Do you remember Isaiah in Isaiah 6 when he has the vision? And the seraphim are flying above the throne of God. And he says, woe is me, I've seen the Lord, I'm a man of unclean lips. And then the seraphim takes tongs from the altar, a coal, and brings that coal and touches Isaiah's lips, and he's cleansed from his sin. Those are coals, maybe different coals, but coals from the altar at the throne of God. But in any event, that coal that Isaiah was cleansed by indicates God's holiness, His white, hot, very, very real physical holiness. What was Moses told to do when he approached the burning bush? Take off your shoes. Why? Because the presence of God made the ground holy. Now here's Lucifer, and he walks among these stones of fire. We've got his picture, and he's barefoot. It doesn't say he's barefoot here, but he's barefoot, and he's walking on these stones of fire. What would that indicate? He is holy. He is the holiest thing next to God. And God has given him this holiness. With holiness comes power and authority. And Lucifer walking among the midst of the stones of fire, trafficking in the closest proximity to God as the anointed cherub that guards, is demonstrating the highest place of heaven, the highest place in the angelic realm. In verse 15 it says, "You were blameless in your ways from the day you were created." He was blameless in his ways. Let's just pay attention to the... What does that indicate? He did some things. He had some ways. He actually functioned. And he functioned more than one time. He was blameless in the ways that he did. Well, what ways? Well, he may have been blameless. It says he's blameless as the high priest of the angelic host. In his representation of God to the angelic realm, and his representation of the angelic realm to God, he was blameless. And let's say that the angelic realm occupied places on the earth. Now you're getting real fruity. I'm not. Look what it says in the past. It says, verse 18, "By the multitude of your iniquities," how many iniquities did he do? More than one, right? The multitude of your iniquities. "In the unrighteousness of your trade," and that trade can be, we'll look at that, merchandising. "You profaned your sanctuaries," plural. What are sanctuaries for? Worshiping God. How would you profane a sanctuary? Worshiping something else. You begin to understand where I'm going with this. Verse 16, "By the abundance of your trade," verse 15, "You were blameless in your ways from the day you were created until unrighteousness was found in you." So we know the source of original sin, don't we? It's not Adam, is it? It's Lucifer. Now, Adam was infected when he submitted to Lucifer, when he submitted to the lie. Sin then entered the world and entered the human race. But this is the original sin. And so you would ask the question, well, what was the unrighteousness? What did he do? Let's read on. It says, "By the abundance of your trade." What does abundance mean? He did it a lot, didn't he? Whatever he did a lot. It says, "You were internally filled with violence, and you sinned. Therefore I have cast you as profane." Profane is something now that's unholy, isn't it? "I've cast you as profane from the mountain of God." He's lost his position of authority. "And I've destroyed you, O covering cherub, from the midst of the stones of fire." He's lost his position of holiness. "Your heart was lifted up because of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom by reason of your splendor." Now, if you get wisdom by being humble, how would you corrupt your wisdom? By becoming prideful. And we see the root of Lucifer's sin is pride. It's arrogance. It's arrogance because of his splendor. And he says, "I cast you to the ground." Now again, I'm assuming the earth is here. The earth is there. And God has cast him away from his throne to the earth. And I'm also making an assumption that the throne of God, the throne room of God, is in close proximity to the earth. The reason I'm doing that is because that's the picture that we get in eternity future. We've got eternity future here. And we've got a new heaven and a new earth and the new Jerusalem coming down out of heaven. Turn to Revelation 21. This takes place after the judgment, the great white throne judgment. Revelation 20, verse 15 says, if anyone's name was not found written in the book of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire. Now, at this point, Satan is in the lake of fire before these people have been cast into the lake of fire. Chapter 21, and I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and first earth passed away, and there's no longer any sea. So there's no sea on this new earth. It's been renovated, we know from 1 Peter, by fire. It's a brand new earth on the outside. However, it is the same terrestrial ball that God started with in eternity past. Verse 2, and I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, made ready as a bride adorned for her husband. What's going on here? We've got the new earth, and we've got, and there are the new heavens, the new earth, and the new Jerusalem is actually coming down, isn't it? It's coming down out of the third heaven, or if you will, through the universe, because the Scripture has three heavens. The sky, which would be the first heaven, the stellar universe, the second heaven, and the third heaven would be the very throne of God. And this new Jerusalem is coming down out of heaven to the earth. It's going to be somewhere in close proximity to the earth. We know that because later on it says that, look in verse 23, and the city has no need of the sun or the moon to shine on it, for the glory of God has illumined it, and its lamp is the Lamb. And the nations will walk by its light. So the light of this new earth will be spread over the earth, and the nations on the earth won't need any light. They won't need the sun or the moon because they have the light of this new Jerusalem. And so in this new Jerusalem, apparently, and some people put it on the earth, some people have it hovering above the earth, but at least it's at least in close proximity to the earth. And this is the eternal state. And look what's going on. Verse 24, the nations will walk by its light, and the kings of the earth will bring their glory into it. So apparently, men from the earth will be bringing the glory of their nations, or the worship of their nations, into this new Jerusalem. And men will be going back and forth from the new Jerusalem to the earth, to the nations, back and forth, back and forth. And this is the eternal state. And so, maybe, perhaps, in eternity past, there was a parallel, I think it's a striking parallel, of Lucifer, who occupies this high priestly role and this role of authority. He would bring the authority and the governance to the angelic realm through Lucifer. And he executed his job as the prime minister perfectly. He executed his job as the worship leader and the high priest perfectly. And this angelic realm honored and glorified God in sanctuaries. If you turn back to Ezekiel 28. By the multitude, verse 18, by the multitude of your iniquities, in the unrighteousness of your trade, you profaned your sanctuaries. What was going on? Well, just like the kings would bring the glory of the nations into the throne of God, Lucifer would bring the glory of these angelic majesties into the throne room of God. And he would come down to the earth, and it could be in close proximity, it could be in the third heaven, but he would come to the earth, and he would be the go-between, the intermediary. The reason I understand this way is I always ask the question, a long time ago I asked this question, how in the world would Lucifer convince 1/3 of the angelic realm to follow him? How would he have that opportunity? And if, like most Christians picture, all angels are all with God in this place way out there, and they're just all there, and they're just all enjoying God, there's nothing really going on, they're just there, how could he convince them to rebel against God and follow him? Because we know from Revelation 12, he's got 1/3 of the angelic realm on his side. How did he do that? And how long did that take? And what kind of influence and power and magnificence would he have had to exert in order to garner that affection and that following? It's as if Lucifer is in the presence of God and he's manifesting this incredible glory. And then he comes to the earth where these angelic sanctuaries are, or these angelic kingdoms, and to them he's manifesting the power and the glory as a viceroy or a prime minister of God. He's ruling and reigning. And to God he's gathering up from these sanctuaries in some way the glory and the majesty and the worship of these angels, and he's taking it to the Father. And back and forth he goes through eternity. And how long he existed at this, we don't know, because there is no time. Time was invented for man. But it could have been eons. We know he did it a lot because it was the abundance of his trade, the multitude of his iniquities. But what went wrong? I think it's very simple. What goes wrong with a lot of pastors, a lot of worship leaders, a lot of political rulers? People begin to follow the creature. And the angelic realm began, and this is speculation, but I think it's very safe speculation. They began to honor Lucifer. And some began to say, wow, you are incredible. Such glory, such majesty, such honor, such integrity, such holiness. And he made a fatal mistake. He made the one mistake that you see all other angels, when they're manifesting themselves to some human in some situation, they never do. Whenever a man begins to worship an angel, what do? Don't worship me, worship God. I'm a fellow servant. They're very quick. Not me. They saw that trick before. They saw that happen. And Lucifer began to go back and forth to these different nations, if you will, or kingdoms. And he was hiding something from God. He wasn't bringing all the glory back to God, all the worship. He was borrowing some. And this happens every day. Ananias and Sapphira. It happens every day in many, many churches, in many, many places of worship, in many, many businesses, in many, many realms of government. When a man becomes impressed with his own splendor and his own glory or his own authority, it really isn't his. It was given to him by God. And then all of a sudden, he begins to use that authority or that splendor or that glory for his own end. And you can see how the multitude of his iniquities, how he was internally filled with violence. And God allowed it to happen. How many trips Lucifer made back and forth, borrowing some glory, enjoying some of this dominion that was given to himself without giving to God? Nobody knows. I don't know. But this is how Lucifer fell. And it says, your heart was lifted up because of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom by reason of your splendor. And I cast you to the ground. I put you before kings that they might see you. You might think, well, I thought there weren't any people here. What are the kings? Well, the kings would be angelic majesties. How do you get that? Turn to Daniel 10. Daniel 10, the angel is conversing with Daniel, is talking to Daniel. Daniel had been praying for 21 days, and the angel has come to deliver a message to him from God. And the angel was held up by other angelic powers that are connected. These are cosmocratons in Ephesians 6:12 that were connected to the earth. And it says, verse 12, then he said to me, do not be afraid, Daniel, for from the first day that you set your heart on understanding this and on humbling yourself before your God, your words were heard, and I've come in response to your words. But the prince of the kingdom of Persia, that's the word Tsar, or Sar in the Hebrew, it just means ruler or king. The prince of the kingdom of Persia was withstanding me for 21 days. Then behold, Michael, one of the chief princes or rulers, Tsarim, came to help me, for I had been left there with the kings of Persia. Are these human or angelic? These are angelic, clearly angelic. And they're called kings, they're called princes, they're called rulers. Later on, he goes in verse 20, do you not understand why I came to you? But I shall now return to fight against the prince of Persia. So I am going forth, and behold, the prince of Greece is about to come. However, I tell you what is inscribed in the writing of truth, yet there's no one who stands firmly with me against these except Michael, your prince. That's the ruler over Israel. It's interesting, you see that these angelic majesties are connected to the earth. And they were connected to the earth back then. And God cast Lucifer down to the earth, and he put him before kings in their shame. There's no other place in the biblical revelation, there's no other place in the Bible where God casts Lucifer to the earth and puts him before kings, human authorities. There's just no place. There's no other place of revelation. There's no other place this passage could fit except in eternity past, when God cast Lucifer to the ground and he's lost his place of authority and dominion and honor at the throne of God. Perhaps Lucifer's arrogance caused him to forget that he was merely a reflection of God. Arrogance is blinding to reality. That he was a creature. He's not a creator. He's not the sovereign God. Perhaps he began to relish the compliments that he was receiving from the angelic realm. Maybe he began to require them. Maybe he began to build a rebellion. I know he did, against God. And his goal was to become the sovereign over the earth and over God's creation and over the angelic realm. At this point, well, let me ask you this. Is Lucifer omniscient? The answer is no. Can he see into the future? No. Does he know the plan of God, the future? No, he doesn't. And he thinks in his arrogance that he's going to be like the Most High God. And next time we will cover that. What is his response after God has cast him down, after he's lost his place, after he's relinquished what God has given him? What is his response? And that will be in Isaiah chapter 14. So next time we will cover Isaiah 14 and Lucifer's response to God's condemnation, to God's judgment in eternity past. And remember, we've not yet, we haven't gotten to man yet. We're just dealing with an angelic realm in eternity past. And we're seeing that there's a huge spiritual war mounting. And when man enters the picture, he enters right into that battlefield of earth. Let's pray. Father, I pray that you would give us discernment, give us wisdom as we travel through the Scriptures and we view your plan. We pray that you would bring things together by your grace. In Jesus' name, amen.